Yeah, and then actually, no, it's.
We have a nice group, so Tom and Tonzi have to stop talking.
Oh, it's a county.
Yeah, well, it's a
No.
Oh, okay. I'm sitting back here.
So I don't think I'm going to give all my big intro. Welcome to the History Survey. I'm Ron Howe, I'm the Executive Director here, and we're delighted that you're here to join us. We hope that you'll enjoy the exhibit if you haven't been here before in memoriam. It's about cemeteries in Tompkins County, and it's not only an invitation to come here, but there's several things to encourage you to get out and about and enjoy the county. So there's scavenger hunts, there's tours, Historic Ithaca has tours, so it really is an opportunity to focus on cemeteries. So I hope that you'll look at the table in the back that has some of the tour information and the scavenger hunt information. But there's also copies of our newsletter back on the table, History Happenings. If you don't get our electronic newsletter, please sign up at the desk to get History Happenings. And I'm delighted to see my Uncle Bob here. Hello, Uncle Bob. How are you?
I just made it.
Thanks for coming. So this is really exciting that Becky and Tom, and I can call them Becky and Tom because they're friends of mine. Becky and I met when we were freshmen at the University of Cincinnati in 1974. So we've known each other a long time. And I met Tom a few years after that. So a little bit about both of them. So Becky Stevens, Rebecca Stevens, is the first ever cultural resources manager for Arlington National Cemetery. And we thought it would be great, since I have this in, to talk about the cemetery that's in our national psyche. So it's, we want you to know about cemeteries in the county, but there's other cemeteries that are just part of what we think about. So thank you, Becky, for being here. She was also former Chief Historical Architect for the National Park Service in the National Capital Region. After practicing architecture throughout the country with the Park Service, supervising construction and designing throughout the country with the Park Service, she did have a little stint with the private sector. Her clients have included the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and the Smithsonian Institute. Becky's going to go first, and then Tom, the Toms. I think it's okay to say they're a husband and wife team. Sometimes you don't like to know that, but we have a small, intimate group.
We like to keep it secret.
So Tom Batanza is the Senior Historical Architect for the Historic Preservation Training Center of the U.S. National Park Service. And he has been the project architect for numerous interdisciplinary teams responsible for several things, including preservation of lighthouses, covered bridges, Civil War monuments, and numerous 18th and 19th century vernacular houses. Currently, he is advising on restoration of the USS Maine Memorial at Arlington National Cemetery. I've told them both there's much more information to know about both Ms. Stevens and Mr. Batanza. So I've asked them to just say what else they want you to know about themselves. So we're going to start with Becky, and thank you both for being here.
Thanks, Rob.
This is kind of my intro. Without her, we wouldn't have had that. So first off, I'd like to thank the Tompkins County History Center here, and my longtime friend and the executive director, Ron Howe, for inviting me to come and talk about my new job, which is the Cultural Resource Manager for Arlington National Cemetery. It's a great job.
Yeah, turn it on first.
Oh, the clicker.
Yeah.
Because the batteries are done. There we go. I'm not as tall as you. How it's going to come out. Well, I'm glad to see you guys here to hear about this, so thanks for coming also. So it's an honor, it's a privilege to work at Arlington National Cemetery. It's also a big responsibility to kind of get it right. Since I'm the first person to really ever be charged with looking at the cemetery in light of its history and its historical resources. It's a place that I'm discovering every day about the history, the rich history at the cemetery, and about the breadth of the history as it relates to our country. It is simply amazing. And one of the things that interested me that I'm still discovering and was a surprise was that you go to a cemetery and you think it's going to be kind of quiet and you'll have time. And really it is an active place. It's a place for the living to honor those who served our country. And we're just loving it all too much almost. There are events all the time. We are open at the cemetery 365 days a year. We have 2,600 wreath layings a year. We have 600 honor flight buses. That's veterans who come in on flights that are paid for by donation, and then they come to the cemetery as one of their stops. We have 100 diplomatic services, usually at the Tomb of the Unknown. Plus, we stage big Veterans Day, you can see it here in the images, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, and wreaths across America. This last year, because it was the 150th birthday, wreaths were placed on every one of the 250,000 graves in one day. And they're up for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then they come down in a day. It's a huge organizational effort. Only the Army could do this in stages. They know how to attack a plan. Right now we have 350 million people who visit the cemetery every year. So it is truly a busy, busy place. And of course we have military burials. 30 funerals are conducted every day at Arlington National Cemetery, Monday through Saturday. And just about every day we have 8 full honor services. And a full honor service would be one with the caisson, the horses, the casket, a band, rifles, the whole great big pageantry of funeral. And occasionally, I don't know how many overflights we have where the jets fly over and then one breaks away. But the other day I saw for the first time, I didn't know it was going to happen, they did it with helicopters, great big helicopters. They were so low, I thought maybe it was the president coming over because they were very low. And then one small away. We have monuments and memorials, which gets directed to what I'm involved with. Right now, I'm indexing and surveying all the monuments. The count is 250 historic structures, but we're not done. Really, to manage a resource, you need to know what you have, and I'm still finding what we have. It's been there long enough. There's no single definitive list. Within those 250 historic structures, we have the burial places of presidents, 2 presidents. Can anyone name the second one? Everyone knows who's the first one, or the primary. Anyone have an idea? It's Taft, Howard Taft. He was a Supreme Court justice and a president, so he's there. And of course, Kennedy and various members of the Kennedy family are there. Artists, explorers, high-ranking officials. We also have freedmen and slaves are also buried on Arlington National Cemetery property. And troops from all the wars to round it out somewhere, probably 100 years ago or so. They brought in some people they reinterred bodies from the Revolutionary War, so they made sure they hit all the wars. So they're all covered within 364 acres of turf that we maintain at Arlington National Cemetery. We are now an official arboretum of 8,500 trees, and we also have 19 miles of road. So it's a major undertaking to maintain Arlington National Cemetery. And one of the things that we did about 4 years ago, before I got there, they GPS'd every grave, and photographed it front and back. And this is all in a geospatial system that within cemetery, we call it MAPPER. And the wonderful thing about MAPPER is it not only helps us schedule and locate where burials are going to occur way into the future, but also all the processes of a burial are checked and double checked in real time. And that's the schedule you see in the upper left-hand corner. So everyone knows when the burial site has been dug properly, when the funeral's over, when the grave site's been tamped, when the sod has gone in. Every process is checked and double checked. I can say that of all the things at Arlington that they've improved in the last 5 years, this is now world class. 5 years ago, they were still using index cards that went back to the beginning, little registries. It was all hand done. And now it's all computerized. And here you can see the GPSing of every grave. And the green stands for open, gray, it's full. And I think the purple is where you have families, so that a spouse will be buried with the husband or wife, and so there's space available there for that. We also use MAPPER. I'm in the engineering division actually, so every one of our projects that are going on, you see the little guy with the flag, that means there's a project going on. And that allows people scheduling the processional or the funeral route to avoid conflict with major construction and repair rehab. So I can both know where and when a funeral is going to go on, and if it's going to go near one of my project sites, so I can tell the contractor, at 9:15 there will be a procession by you, we need to stop work today. And at 9:15 there will be a procession going by. It's pretty much clockwork. But this is a great way to keep everyone on staff informed and up to date with what's happening. If we have special events or wreath layings, that's on there, so you can go in every day. The public does not see that side of it, but we have public applications that run off the same information. So you can go to the website if you're a family member, and you'll know where the burial site's going to be and what time it's happening. But you also have Explorer, which is an app for smartphones, where if you have a relative or a descendant or just someone you're interested in, you can find their grave. If you're standing in the cemetery, it will show you the path to that grave from where you're standing. You can also look up major monuments, memorials, and have a little history of that historic site there. And that will be expanded into the future as I'm finding out about famous artists and other works that we don't currently have on MAPPER or Explorer. We'll be adding that in with interesting information about its art, its design. And then for in-house, I'm also collecting information. It's not later. You'll see I'm collecting information on when historic properties were last worked on. So in-house, we can start to keep a record of routine maintenance and when things need to be worked on the cost for that. But of course, for me to know what is important to save and protect, I need to know the history of the place. So I need to really know the history in order to understand what's significant. I love this image. We have a photographer who's been blending old with new. So on the left you have a wreath laying. This is at the Coast Guard Memorial, one of my favorite memorials in the cemetery, with the side on the right, which is new. Those who are preservationists in here, you'll note the change in landscape. One of the things I'm discovering is the object itself doesn't change, but the landscape around it changes. So if you had a landscape design that was open, like an open room with trees around it, as time goes on, vegetation gets planted and it starts encroaching, and pretty soon you have a room that's in shade and not a monument that's in light. So that's something I'm looking forward to working on with our arborist, is cutting down trees, which is really hard to get done. So to know the history and what's important, it starts with L'Enfant, Pierre L'Enfant, and the design for the city of Washington, right? George Washington selected this peninsula of land between two rivers as the site for the nation's capital. That's Pierre. And here, here you can see the major axis that he planned for the capital. Now, of course, today, if you know Washington at all, this has been filled in. And we have the Lincoln Memorial here and the bridge across to Virginia off that axis a bit. So the city has expanded beyond the phone. But why it's important is that George Washington Parke Custis, who is the adopted grandson of George Washington, inherited this property. He inherited a number of properties from his actual father, who died when he was young, which is why Washington adopted him. And this particular property, Arlington Plantation, overlooks the city. He selected it because it overlooks the city of Washington. So as the city was to grow, he could see the city coming to life before him, the city his father selected the site for, and people from the city could see his great house. So it worked both ways. So here's an illustration of Arlington House in about 18, let me make sure I get this right. It's in the Harper's New Monthly Magazine, 1853. And this is described as a gentleman's farm, a gentleman's plantation. And what we also need to know is this was the seat for the Custis business. He meant it to both glorify and be a monument to his father, George Washington, and for it to be a place of prestige for him and his family. So in a way it was a show house overlooking the Potomac River. And here's the view today from the front porch of Arlington. Just beautiful. Of course the city's pretty much filled out, but that's the view that he wanted to have from his front porch.
That is the house over there.
Oh yeah, that's Arlington House.
Okay.
It's managed by the National Park Service. So it's a little keyhole. It's surrounded by the cemetery now, but yeah, it's still there. Just a few pictures to show the transition, because the landscape design of Arlington Plantation so affects Arlington National Cemetery today. This was laid out in the romantic tradition of the English garden or English plantation site, English estate. So the front was open from trees, cleared to the river, so you have a nice clear view. To the south of the house and north were layered levels for a formal garden. And then in the back of the house, behind the house, they left a wooded area, almost as a natural area, as a backdrop to the house, a green buffer, so the house could be seen from the river as this house in a wonderful wooded area. And that's very much in the English tradition. So, what happened, however, let me make sure I get all the key points there. Yes, I did. So, one more picture. By 1861, right, the man that's most noted, the most noted figure for Arlington House is Robert E. Lee. And it's from Arlington House that Robert E. Lee decided to give up his commission in the U.S. Army and support the Virginians in their secession from the Union, right from that house. And so within days of his signing that and delivering the letter, the Army came and confiscated, seized the whole property. It's 1,100 acres they seized in 1861. So by 1862, what you see on the Arlington Cemetery, all of these are fortifications, or Arlington House, I'm sorry, are all the fortifications, part of the whole ring of fortifications to protect Washington, the city, during the Civil War. From May of 61 through October of 62, this was the headquarters for all of the defense of Washington. So the Army came in and like pretty much trashed the house. And it was finally the Army higher-ups that put an end to it and said, you know, you are vandalizing essentially our heritage, because all of George Washington's things were there. And so that's one reason why a lot of George Washington's items got scattered to the wind, because the Union Army looted it, essentially. So Arlington House, Arlington Manor, served as a functional and operational core for the cemetery from 1864 to 1931, when Arlington House itself became part of the National Park Service. The first burials at Arlington happened in 1864, and this is the first person buried, first military burial, William Christman. And he's over, I gave out maps, so if I start talking about sections, you can open up those foldouts, you can see the section. He's in section 27. And what's important about that is, if you look at section 27, it's way north of Arlington House. Well, when the Quartermaster General, Montgomery C. Meigs, saw how far the soldiers were were burying people from the house, he was very upset because Meigs selected Arlington grounds to bury soldiers on so that Lee could never come back and use this as a proper estate. He never wanted it to function again as a home. He had revenge in his heart, I guess. They both went to school together. They were both in West Point together. And Meigs was not, no longer a friend of General Lee. So what happened was Meigs came over himself and personally selected the burial sites for a number of monuments, or for a number of men, placed monuments all along the formal gardens. There's 45 headstones that bring the formal gardens of Arlington House. This is Arlington House, of course, right here. And then he had famous generals planted in the front yard. Planted, I'm sorry. It almost seems like there's so many, but buried in the front yard to bring more attention to the fact that this was now Union land. This was not the South. This was Northern land, and it was going to stay that way. The papers at the time show this scene, and from descriptions of what was happening at Arlington House and Arlington Plantation. This little thing over here, this is the corner of the house. Here's the view to Potomac and Washington. And this is the tomb of the Civil War unknowns. Very few people know that that's actually the first unknown burials. There's approximately 2,111 soldiers buried in a common, it's a lined crypt buried in the ground. And these soldiers came from the first and second battles of Manassas. And the fact that they put that tomb and later a amphitheater, which you'll see, and these other graves so close to the house is just a constant reminder that this property was seized for a reason. And you just can't forget about it when you're there. This is 1904, and by now we're definitely into a transition at Arlington Cemetery from the site of Civil War burials to a national place of honor for military veterans. It's slowly transitioning into a national shrine versus just a simple or single war burial site. What I like here, it also shows the influences, the overlay now on the plantation design of the Beaux-Arts tradition and the City Beautiful movement. A very vast and formalized pathways, tree lines, circles with fountains, roundabouts with vistas. Here's Arlington House. And here you can see the original design, the kind of curvilinear, natural cemetery design that was popular during the Victorian era. You can also see remnants up this way. They don't have it shown here very well, but of the path that Lee Custis designed for the house. So now we're getting 3 different layers of design on the same landscape. So for me, before we go and select a site for a new monument or change a roadway, we really need to understand how that fits in the whole design and layering of history at Arlington. This also, is anyone familiar with this Commission of Fine Arts? Few of you are. It's actually a federal agency, very small, that was commissioned or was set up after this plan was done, the McMillan Plan. The McMillan Plan extended L'Enfant's Plan because by now the city was built out to the extent of the L'Enfant Plan, and the McMillan Plan had some of the best designers of the turn of the century on the board, including Daniel Chester French and Olmsted, and I'm not sure all the other ones off the top of my head. But what they did was they extended this, they had a much grander view of what was going to happen to the Washington Monument. It's not like that. The Supreme Court was supposed to go here. A monument to Lincoln, remember that is not even built yet by 1910. This is their plan for the city, and this is pretty important for Arlington National Cemetery. This is Memorial Bridge right here, and this links the view from the Lincoln Memorial to Arlington House with this bridge linking the north and the south. So they envisioned this physical link as part of coming together as a nation. Both physical as well as kind of spiritually or as a nation, linking and coming to grips with that. So here we have both the Chicago World's Fair, City Beautiful movement really there on this plan, and it's as how it's envisioned going into Arlington National Cemetery. So the whole promenade These are from World War II, the Italians, due to the hemicycle, which is now the formal gateway into Arlington National Cemetery. Before that, you'll see that there was a line, it was actually a railroad line, a trolley car line that extended along this road, which we still have pretty much in the cemetery. Now it has some trees in it. So there was no single monumental entrance into Arlington. There were a number of gates. And just a few fun images. This is 1930, so you can start to see Arlington Cemetery. This is a good landmark. It's the amphitheater. It was dedicated in 1929, and this is where the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is, now right in the front. And you can see here all the military bases, the Navy. The Navy used these buildings. And what I like right here, and you can see it on your map, one of those Civil War fortifications was torn down, but the road follows the pattern of the fort. And I'm not sure you can see this very well, but I'd like to point out that Arlington Plantation Grounds, its original grounds, extended south, and here, and the very southern end of it is the Pentagon. And the very northern end of the cemetery is under redevelopment. You notice changes in landscape and more trees, less trees over time. Now the cemetery extends into all this, what was called South Fort Myer Base. I like this too because anyone who's lived in Washington, D.C. knows the freeway system. This is I-66 under construction. That's kind of really fun if you live there. You wonder how did they get around before that. And here is one of the great accomplishments while I've been there. I can't claim any that I did it. I just saw it through to the end. But Arlington National Cemetery went on the National Register in April 2014. And what's so remarkable about that is the Department of Defense has a policy that no military installation will go on the National Register. You can study it all you want up to the nomination, but it will not go on. So we were able to get Arlington National Cemetery on the National Register. And this is the points of interest from the National Register nomination, showing that the boundary, anything in the boundary wall is a National Historic District. So everything in the cemetery is on the National Register in the district. So it's a hard concept to get your thinking around, because if we built a new building today, it will be on the National Register today. There's no adding to the nomination. Everything is on the register. And that includes the landscapes, which I've talked so much about, the Beaux-Arts traditions and big vistas. This is the front of the amphitheater. The rolling hills with monuments and curvilinear streets. The rows of uniform headstones marking graves. What some people who have not been there don't realize is not every grave marker is the traditional Army headstone. We have individual headstones, families selected to have for their loved ones. And that's particularly in Section 1, the oldest section. We have very few fancy headstones going in anymore, but they're still remarkable, and no one surveyed them for artistic merit. And there's probably somewhere around 20,000 of them that we need to look at. I concluded this one because this is a trial headstone, and I found only one in the cemetery. Originally, they used wood crosses to mark every grave. Those deteriorated really quickly. So they were looking for another material. And they played around with lots of different stuff and experimented. Well, this one was one that was designed by Meg's. And what it was is they melted down ammunitions and created these little headstones. And this is holding up really well. It's never been replaced. The marble ones have to be replaced periodically because they wear out or they crack. And I love this one because of the tree. We do have trees that have grown into marbles. We have circulation routes, boundary fences, and gates that all go on, or that are all part of the National Register. What I like here is this gate is called the Ord-Wetzel Gate. It was taken down in the early 1970s, just kind of stockpiled behind a building because they needed to widen the roads. And we are now having conservation work done on every one of the stones. They're almost done. And this is going to be reinstalled, re-erected on the north part of the cemetery. And there's another gate, the Sheridan Gate, which will also go in, and that'll be part of a southern expansion project. This gate is original. It's one of the many minor gateways that used to go into the cemetery. Here are some of the structures. The original amphitheater that's up near Arlington House, the one that replaced it in the early 1920s after World War I. We have lodge houses that were part of a military cemetery. And we do have a lot of cremations, and we have columbarium. This is one of the columbarium. And of course we have memorials and monuments. This one is the one to Pierre L'Enfant. And notice it's on access to that major route into the city. This particular grave site has the best view of all of the cemetery. It looks out over the city he planned. So pretty cool. Part of my job was to survey, actually it's a team, Park Service is helping me, survey every monument, correlate it with GPS and coordinates so that I can eventually tie it into Mapper and Explorer, but also rate its condition and record when it was worked on. And we gave them rankings based on their deficiency and their condition. And based on that, last year I was able to get a contract award for 13 monuments to be conserved. Of the many that started, these were the 13 of a similar type that needed work. And here's an example of some of those before and after during work. This is Sir John Dill. It had been probably 10 years since it was worked on, the statue itself, the equestrian, and it had started to, the wax layers had worn away, and the patination had worn, and you were starting to see the copper bronze staining coming through. And if you leave that go too long on a bronze statue, it gets bronze disease and just eats through and pits really badly. So you need to keep a wax layer on as the protective layer, kind of like paint on a building, and you redo the paint every once in a while. Here I think these posts came out. This is the entrance to Dill came out really nicely after the conservation work. And we think that the white letters are ivory. We're not sure, but they're just beautiful. That's the finished product for John Dill. The Confederate monument, that's this one. This one was interesting for a number of reasons. It was included as needing work. The conservators got going about late June, and as soon as they started removing the wax, they discovered that the last conservator, or last person to work on it, had made the wax, tinted it very dark black, and that hid a lot of problems. So we had to stop the contract to see if we could issue a change order in order to remove all the wax down through the patination level, down to bare metal. And so the whole monument was scaffolded right as the controversy about the Southern flag came to light. And so we had many questions from people. Are you removing it? What are you doing to the Confederate monument? So even last week, can't you write something up? So, so we can tell people, no, we're not taking the Confederate monument down. This was just before I left, what it looked like after removing all the wax down to the base layer. And I was looking at test spot. Oops, I was looking at tests. With forward instead of back. So here you can see before, and by now I'm sure it's a nice semi-shiny but dark brown patina on the whole thing, because it should be done by this week. The interesting thing I think about this particular memorial, it was approved, Congress finally approved Confederate burials in the cemetery really late. In fact, during Decoration Day, Memorial Day, people who wanted to honor the Southern dead, their relatives, were not allowed to place anything on the grave or have any celebrations at all until the beginning of beginning of the 20th century. So it was Woodrow Wilson on his last day, oh no, that's another guy, his last day, sorry. In 1912, approximately, it was approved to be able to bury Southerners, Confederates, in Arlington National Cemetery. And they created an area, it's a circular area, you can kind of see that here, a big circle. And then the daughters of Confederate soldiers petitioned to be able to have this monument erected, and they collected the funds, and finally it was approved, and it was done as another gesture to reconcile the country. Just like the bridge was, this was the first effort. So when people talk about us taking this down to erase the Southern, the memory of the Southern efforts or the Southern secession, this statue was actually erected for just the opposite reason, to bring the country together. So it will stay. It's not going anywhere. A few other before and afters. This is Sheridan, a great Civil War general, depending on what side you are on. This is Philip Kearny, general, using flames to melt the wax, use the beeswax combination as the finished layer. You have to melt, you have to heat the metal to get the wax to go on smoothly. Here is the Rough Riders, and when we started out, Rough Riders was a single color, again by the same worker. He tinted the wax. So it wasn't until we removed the wax, and you can just see it here, that it was two-tone, almost like a gold layer and a black layer. And so we went ahead and removed all the wax and repainted the background, and now really the letters show, and you can really read the monument. The biggest monument I'm working on is the amphitheater. And here I'm working with the National Park Service conservator out of New York, and she decided to tackle, the first issue was the discoloration. And so you can see here the different kinds of color. She divided it by color. And she did testing one summer ago to see if we could remove some of it. The calcium carbonate was very thick in some places, like a ½ inch thick. We had to hand chisel that off. We were able to get copper staining out pretty successfully. This rusting is from the stanchions. I'm working with the operations people to get plastic stanchions or something else. Don't put it on the marble. This is caused from lead. It cannot come out. All the Vermont Danby marble experiences this discoloration. This is from probably a water repellent treatment done. Since we have no records, we don't know what they use, and we probably won't be able to get that off. The really key thing that is proving troublesome is the biofilms. And it's even now on the Jefferson Dome. If you go back to Washington, it's the same stone, Vermont Danby. And it's almost gray black now. This has something to do, the conservators think it has something to do with both the Clean Air Act has made the air clean enough that it doesn't kill all the lichen and moss and stuff that you know would collect on the monuments. And two, it could be a little bit of global warming because now it's just warm enough to keep these things alive. And so they never really die. When one dies back, the other one grows. So they're all living in this kind of soup together. And the chemicals that people are using, if any of you are involved with cemetery conservation, you've heard of D2. It's a quaternarian ammonia product that is essentially supposed to kill the biogrowth. It's no longer working. It's no longer working on our building. Here's the test. This is when you put the product on, it turns orange. And then this is about a year into it. You can see the striping, but it doesn't get it clean enough to make it worth the effort. Scaffolding is going to cost millions of dollars. And if it's only going to clean it a little or only keep it clean for a year or two, it's not worth it. So I'm trying to work with our leadership at the cemetery and talk about what is the appropriate appearance of these buildings. The Army wants them white and bright. White and bright. We want it clean. And we may not get it clean without damaging. Yes, you could get it clean if you power washed it, that you would erase all the carving and the decorative features. So it's a really hard balance. They're not quite there yet, but I think they're understanding. And what we're going to do is we're going to now test some. The conservators has some ideas of testing something rather than killing the biogrowth or biofilm, making it a less, not such a good habitat for them. Ooh, this does not come out. Look at that. That center picture is a drawing. Believe it or not. Some of the things that are coming up, a few structures are coming up because of our surveys and condition assessments to work on. This one is the Fort Myer Gate. It's currently in the preservation design phase. The Tanner Amphitheater, again designed by Miggs. This summer we were able to locate the earliest drawing or a photograph of Tanner. This is 1903. And you'll notice the wisteria just dripping off of it. The wisteria is still there. It's everyone loves it, except the horticulturalist who knows it's an invasive, is trying to find something else. It actually had grapes and hyacinth, or grapes and the wisteria on there. And we read about a tent structure to keep people cool during Memorial Day. Well, there we finally found a photograph of the tent structure. Very quickly, we're going to be, actually it's the National Park Service is working with me, and we're going to be conserving all the doors and windows on the amphitheater. Tom, how many doors and windows are there? It's his team's survey.
Actually, I don't recall. Probably around 5 or 6 dozen.
Oh, quickly, Tomb of the Unknown. We have 5 minutes. Here's the Tomb of the Unknown. This is the Civil War Unknown by Arlington House. This is the Tomb of the Unknown for the World War I veterans. The grand staircase up to it. The marble is performing just as you would think marble should perform. It's a natural material. It's eroding slowly and surely. It has natural fission lines in it. In 1950 is the earliest report I could find of someone doing a condition assessment on the sarcophagus. At that point, it was about 20 years in place. This is a solid piece of Colorado Ewell marble. And the first conservation work was done in the 1990s, We have no other records. There may have been other things done. You can see what's happening and what's concerning people are these cracks. We've done in the past, every 10 years, every 5 years or so, 5 to 10 years, they do a study. Is it going to fall apart? Is it going to slide off? What's happened? This is just terrible. I'm not that concerned about it. We now have techniques to fill in the crack and keep the water at least from getting into it. But the cracks are extending, and we'll be measuring the cracks again this year and refilling the little crack lines. It's almost like a toothpaste consistency of lime and marble dust that they finally have found will fill the cracks without being seen. But that means that they're very weak and they come out pretty quickly. So every 3 to 5 years we'll have to be redoing the cracks. There's some that have opened up, or the filling material is not in there anymore. And we have to work on the plaza. And you'll notice the rust lines, maybe you will, from the old guard as they march up and down. They leave rust from the cleats on their boots, and that's now gone into the granite. And the discussion is that marking part of history? Do we retain it, or do we take it off? Even if we could take it off, should we take it off? We do have the other unknown soldiers that are flat in front of the one that everyone knows, and those have conservation issues and cracking issues. And finally, here at Arlington National Cemetery, we're preserving memories for the most part. People expect it not to change, and yet, as I've shown you, it's been a constant change. So you need to know what's important to keep and what's important, what's okay to let go of. So I thank you. And do you have any questions? Yes?
In reference to that last slide there, I'm curious how much is consultation with the family considered when there's something changing with an area of the cemetery or anything involved?
We don't generally change anything that would cause us to reinter bodies. So that's kind of sacred, no matter what that stays. We are in the process of correcting headstones where we've missed someone being an honor, recipient of some honor that's not on the headstone. Headstones can be recarved. And we, of course they consult with the family if the family is still alive. It's very hard in some cases to find descendants. Anyone else?
Is it still a standing order, anybody honorable discharged and be buried there?
Yes. Yes.
How about the cremation now? They still have a headstone, but they're only...
We do have a lot of columbarium where we put cremated remains. So a lot of families are opting for the columbarium burial versus the in-ground. But it's their choice, the family's choice, which to do. We're going to run out of burial space at Arlington in 2025. So right now we have a major expansion going on, taking out some of those woods that were part of Custis's grand estate. So we are extending the capacity, but still some of those will be, there's quite a bit of columbarium slots in those too. And now we're expanding into the Navy area. You saw the buildings along the row in that one picture. Those buildings are gone, and the cemetery is going to expand south. And there's both in-ground burial and columbarium planned for that area too. So now the Arlington will be an active cemetery until about 2050, plus or minus, which isn't that many years away. It's only 35 years, right? We will run out of space, and that's one of the reasons some people opt for the cremation.
I was surprised, and 3 years ago, I went back, my daughter and 2 nieces, and we were in American Cemetery on the beach. I was surprised at the unknowns on the stone, so many unknown.
Yes, it's amazing. This was in France?
They part
Was the unknowns in France or here? In Arlington?
over in American Cemetery, right on the beaches.
Oh, yeah. Just didn't know.
This is American Cemetery.
It is. Right.
What's the most visited segment of Arlington?
Oh, bar none, the Kennedy gravesite. Just a beeline of people all the time. Followed by the Tomb of the Unknown, and then Audie Murphy's grave. He's the most decorated soldier ever, and it's right across from the Tomb of the Unknown, so it's also very convenient to see him at the same time.
Do you give, not you, but does Arlington give guided tours, or how do you deal with the visitors? Because obviously you said 350 million, that's astounding.
Well, 3.5.
3.5.
I may have said the wrong thing.
You did. It's like the entire population of the country.
Right, comes here once a year, and
So 3.5 million, like that's
That's still a high number.
It's still a very high number.
So do people have guided tours as an option, or how is it organized in terms of visitors?
There's a number of options.
Okay.
We do have tourmobile buses.
Oh, they can come into the property? Okay.
Yeah, and so there are bus tours with audio tours, and it stops wherever you want and picks you up wherever you want. You can also go on your own, and you can use that application to guide yourself. It's an open campus right now, so people can come and go at will. To drive a car, you need a pass.
Okay.
But any family who has a family member there can have a pass. So there's plenty of car traffic there too.
What about bikes? Are you able to? Okay.
We've been trying to get a bike share station in front, an official bike share, because that's big in Washington. And there's a metro stop right at Arlington Cemetery, so it would be a perfect combination. But that's considered recreational use. And you cannot use a bike, you're not to run, no dog walking. So leadership is trying its best to keep this a place of honor and repose, despite all the stuff that goes on all the time.
So in addition to the fact that you mentioned artists and you have L'Enfant and other people buried there, but really it's primarily military, it's viewed primarily as a military.
Yes, and anyone who is also an artist or whatever was also served in the military.
So it's exclusive.
Exclusive. We do have a small section where part of the cemetery was a freedmen's village. And as those people passed away, there is a section for the freedmen. And usually their grave sites say citizen. They usually don't have a name. So we do have a few other sites, but primarily it's veterans. And that's it. And their families, their direct families. So if you'll bear with us, my husband, Tom Batanza, is going to talk about one specific project, which is the Masters Main restoration, a true restoration. And this one we selected because of the science involved with keeping it up and restoring it. So it's kind of fascinating. It looks like a simple monument, but it's going to take a lot to conserve it. And it's a prominent monument. If we could just get Steve Van Hoven to cut the trees down. Well, I have succeeded in getting 3 trees down. That was my first accomplishment. So we just switch it on. Thank you.
Becky, well, Tom said, will you just say something about funding, like how is it a special line item of the federal government in terms of funding?
It is. It's direct appropriation from Congress.
Direct appropriation, okay. That's nice.
And it doesn't go through DOD, although they kind of manage it. It's direct appropriation.
On a yearly basis, the city presents is it budget?
This, I've never
Are
worked
we
with
gonna
another
show it?
federal agency. We have,
It depends.
believe it or not, no earmark. You can spend it forever
Oh,
until
okay.
it's spent out. But they've stopped that, but we still
Okay.
have it. It's legacy money.
Okay.
We have 5-year money, 3-year money, 2-year money, and 1-year money. So I know that that is going to come to an end as we improve the infrastructure, doing all the work that we're doing now. But for now, it's very nice to be able to make decisions about resources that aren't money dependent. So it's great.
Hi. So, like Greg said, we're going to talk about the mast of the USS Maine Memorial, and I'm going to basically give you an overview of the ship and how the memorial came to be, and then we'll talk about the memorial itself. And as Rebecca mentioned, so the cemetery hired the National Park Service to help them do some projects in the cemetery, because other than herself, they don't really have a preservation-oriented staff there. So we do this sort of stuff all the time, although this memorial is sort of unique. And I remember one time sitting in a van up on the hill outside the memorial, because it was so cold we couldn't really stand outside. And there was so much brain power in the van, you could feel it vibrate, and we couldn't figure out how to do, what our next step was with this thing. We're like, how could there be so many people sitting in this van, and we can't figure out what to do with this memorial? It can't be this hard. But actually, it's turned out to be pretty challenging. This is the commissioning of the ship, and they had this ceremony where they would have a dedication thing going on. The Maine was built at the New York Naval Yard. We're going to talk about the history a little bit. This is the actual christening of the ship, which happened in 1890. So this ship is part of Teddy Roosevelt's Great White Fleet when he was Secretary of the Navy. And here you can see them, doing the traditional christening of the ship. This is the battleship Maine, circa 1898. And the mast we're going to talk about in particular is the main mast. It has 2 masts. The masts were ceremonial. The ship did not need them. It was a steam-powered ship. Roosevelt had these masts included because he liked to fly flags on his ships. He wanted something for the sailors to climb up into, for exercising, and they also helped move freight on and off of the ship as well. So they were sort of used, but they really didn't need them. And this, up to here, it's steel, and then this part right here is timber. And the timber part did not survive. What happened next, which was, this is my favorite. How the sailors used to dry their laundry while on board. Just hang it from the rigging. And here again, you can see the full mast there. The cresting on this ship is amazing, right at the bow.
Tom, you have a pointer there, so.
Right, okay. Anyway, so we all know the ship exploded in Havana Harbor in 1898. Over 212 sailors lost their lives in this explosion. There's great controversy over why it exploded, but we don't really have to go there. Main thing is that it did explode. And the Congress, in all its wisdom, let the ship lay in the harbor for 12 years. Cuban Spanish, because Havana Harbor was under Spanish rule at the time, were very upset at the United States because the ship was silting up the harbor. And it was causing the harbor not to be able to be used. Americans don't really know all the history about it, but finally decided that they needed to go down and salvage the ship. So they sent the Army Corps of Engineers down in 1911, who built a coffer dam around the ship, pumped the water out until they could actually get to the wreck, and then they started salvaging off the components of the ship that they thought were important, mainly the guns. Now, this ship had been there for 10 years, and all of a sudden it became urgent priority to go rescue the guns. If anybody had wanted to access the ship and look at the guns or any other top secret stuff the U.S. had on board, it was just laying there for them to go out and look at it. We didn't really protect the wreck. Initially, the Navy removed bodies, sailors' bodies that were immediately accessible, but they did not go into the ship to remove any of the remains. That didn't happen until this project took place in 1911, 1912. Here's the mast, which was saved. So both masts were saved. In the wreck, The main mast stayed vertical above the water and was subject to tidal action right where it was attached to the deck. The mizzen mast, the smaller of the two masts, went over into the water and was completely submerged. And you can sort of see the main mast there. They took it down pretty quick. Here it is. I think this is in the Navy Yard. The mast was sent to the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. They had decided they were going to have a memorial and that they were pretty sure they were going to try to figure out how to use the mast as part of it. And it's a steel mast. It's typical 19th century steel plate construction. It's riveted. It's pretty thick steel plate. It's got T-sections on the inside that help stiffen it and had all these appendages for the hoists and things. These were all pretty much removed off of it. This is a view of the first interment of sailors from the Maine, and this happened pretty quickly thereafter. I think it says December 23rd, 1899. There's no memorial or anything yet. The first thing they did was they got an anchor from another ship, not the Maine, and they created a small memorial. And it took until 1912 before they really had a design competition for the memorial that's there now. So Fine Arts Commission of Fine Arts with Navy and whoever was running the cemetery at that time, the Army, had a design competition. They didn't like any of the 4 final entries, so finally they said, let's hire Nathan C.Y. He happened to be the city architect for the District of Columbia. He'd done a lot of work in the district. He pretty much worked with the Commission of Fine Arts to come up with this design, which incorporates the main mast, and it has this circular structure at the base, which is to replicate a turret on the ship, a gun turret on the ship. And this is about, I don't know, 30 feet in diameter maybe? And it was meant to be, I think, a contemplative space that you could enter into, although we've never found any evidence that there were benches or anything like that in there. It's a space that you can go into, and you'll see some photos of it. He did drawings. There's 4 sheets of drawings. We always thought they were design drawings. We have never really found what we think is a construction set. However, we did find 30 pages of specifications talking about the materials and such. And it's really wonderful because it does show you pretty much how it's built. It's a concrete core structure at the turret level. It's lined with a marble veneer, and it has heavy granite paneling on the exterior. And the paneling on the exterior has lots of decorative carving in it, has the names of all the sailors that they knew of at the time in 1913, carved in. And it also shows a foundation condition, which we weren't really sure if this is what they did, and we're still not really sure if this is what they did. But some of the other detailing is pretty accurate in terms of how they actually constructed it. And especially with the dome, there's this fill material, there's a layer of waterproofing over the concrete, there's fill material, and then there's sort of this stepped dome, which is made out of granite pieces that constitute the shallow dome on the exterior. The mast comes right up through the middle of it. This is the mast here. In this section, it doesn't show going all the way through. But 4 sheets of drawings, that's it. Decoration Day came in 1930. They had dedication ceremony. Here's the completed structure. A couple things to notice are the rigging here. These initially we weren't sure whether these were structural or non-structural. They turned out to be non-structural, but notice the rat lines, the horizontal lines that are going up the shrouds. During the dedication, they had 50 sailors in their dress whites up in the rigging. And that was mentioned specifically in the write-up in the newspaper, although this is a photograph, I think, from the dedication. I'm not sure. They probably climbed up and down the rigging after that as well. But that was something that we sort of discovered early on and asked the cemetery if they were interested in having the rigging restored, because originally this started as a waterproofing project, and the former superintendent said, yes, we definitely want to restore the rigging. So we were happy about that. This is another photograph shortly after it was finished. The site really hasn't changed too much. This is paved now instead of being gravel, and there's annual plants that get planted in around the base. So these are the granite panels. This is the stepped dome, the mast with the crow's nest. right from this point on is where the wooden mast would have risen about. Look, those aerial towers. You notice those before.
Is that monument in Arlington, is it?
Yes, this is in Arlington National Cemetery, correct. This is the USS Maine Memorial. I forget what section it's in. Do you remember? I thought you would know offhand. So, it basically, this memorial, basically from 1915 on, there is no record of any maintenance on this whatsoever. And I'm afraid I probably don't have a lot of photographs well, maybe I do, of the condition that it was in 2004 when the National Park Service was first asked to come take a look at this. We'll just continue with the slides because I think I do go into it. So I got to be up on a lift and during the assessment phase, and we were able to really get some photographs of the thing from the top down. This is looking into the crow's nest from the top and down to the dome with the shrouds. This is a view of the interior of the mast. We popped this little steel piece off. That's not a historic piece that was added to sort of get the mast closed. It says on the drawings, and it turns out to be true, the mast is filled a third of the way up with concrete, and that was probably to stiffen it structurally, but also it has become a sore point in the treatment of the memorial because it retains water. We still found some of the hand-tied Turk's head knots that were done by the sailors in 1915 who did the original rigging. The Navy did the original rigging and used well, traditional techniques such as wrapping the rope eventually in leather and coating it with pine tar and rosin, which eventually turns black. But these knots are coated with white lead paint, which we can't, well, we didn't think we could do anymore, but I'm not really sure. We're not doing it right. The biggest problem with this is it leaked like a sieve. And this is the mosaic tile floor on the inside, and this is just a little evidence of the water in there, but you can sort of see the tide lines across the floor. It's unusual to go in here and for it to be dry. Normally there's an inch or two of water on the floor. Here's some corrosion engineers that came in as part of the initial phase 1 investigation to figure out really what was going on with this. And we're looking at the corrosion on the mast here. And water literally runs down the side of this when it rains. And there's a little hatch on the bottom, which is not in this photograph, which we removed, and about 40 gallons of water just came flooding out into the memorial. The concrete that's in the core of the mast, which the whole intersection here is filled, so now we're inside the turret. And about a third of the way up on the exterior is just 100% saturated with water. And we found this by taking core samples, and I think there's some photos. We did a flood test on the exterior to try to figure out how it was draining. The benches were fairly certain used to be tilted slightly outwards so that the water would actually run off of them. And here you can see, as part of our flood test, the water is just sitting on the benches. But the key thing to know is that there was a gutter built in, and I think I have a slide of it. Well, we'll get to the gutter, but anyway, this is more about the water and other caulking problems that we're having in between the granite pieces. But I'm hoping there's a gutter. Oh, this is deterioration of the mast, staining of the marble on the inside. Water actually comes out through the joints between the marble panels. It leaves all sorts of staining. We'll get to the gutter. Well, actually, the gutter is like right down here. We're coming. Shrouds were in very poor condition. This is in 2004. All the ratlines have been removed. We don't know when they were removed, but we think sometime in the 40s. And I think that's only because there's an engineer there who gave us that information. We couldn't actually find any records. Oh, these are the embrasures. So there's a series of embrasures around the monument that allow air to come in. But these are just bronze grills. There's no glass or anything in there. So it allows for air to pass through. And here you can see water on the floor. And you can also see the wheat lines on the marble panel on the interior. This is the typical condition of one of the embrasure grills prior to any conservation work being done. They still look like this. Conservation work hasn't started yet. And we did take core samples through the mast to sort of get a better understanding of what the still was, how it was manufactured, and also where exactly did the concrete stop? Because on the drawings it doesn't really say where exactly it stopped. And we needed to know, we also needed to know what the concrete was made out of also. What are the components that go into it? I guess I don't really have any pictures of the gutter at this point, but we'll get to it. It's the most important thing. So 2004 to 2008, there was the first phase of analysis, and then things started happening at the cemetery and their management structure changed. The project basically went dormant until 2011. We were asked to come back, and we had a slightly different approach this time. Instead of the National Park Service actually doing all the investigation work, we decided we would actually hire an A&E firm to help manage all the consultants that we were going to need to actually do what we needed to do. We figured out what we didn't know and what we needed to know, and we figured out what was the best way to do it, and we decided we needed help. So we had a contract let, we worked with a firm in DC who hired all the subcontractors. They studied it, they did a condition assessment report, and I think this is the final submission in 2013. That was the first phase, and they've actually now gotten to the point where we've done construction documents to do the restoration of it. But we looked at the foundation, we excavated underneath the structure to sort of figure out how it was being held up. We found these vertical, horizontal fins, which we didn't know were there, which really helped stabilize it. We were able to analyze more about how the mast was actually attached to the foundation and whether or not the base plate was there, and it is there. The roof drainage, and I will spend a little time here. So there was a gutter built in around the dome, and initially this shows the drawing as per the original construction. So it was a waterproofing membrane that is not shown in this drawing, but was on top of the fill, and the stone sat on top of it. And for some reason, the gutter was undersized from the beginning, and we think it must have been overflowing, and they decided to enlarge the gutter. And they enlarged the gutter by cutting down into the other stone material, and basically what they did was they perforated the waterproofing membrane that they had there by deepening the gutter. They installed a new copper gutter in the widened trough, deepened trough, but as soon as this gutter sprang a leak, water started getting into the wall core structure of the dome, of the turret. And water was getting into the dome too at the base of the mast, where the mast goes into the dome. But this was the key area, and we figured that once they did this, it probably lasted 3 to 5 years before it started leaking. So we know that that was done in 1930 something. I forget exactly. 1929. So it was built, finished in 1915. By 1929, they changed the roof structure, the gutter part, and it's been leaking ever since, causing all that damage. So that was the big aha moment when we found through documentary research that this change had been done, and when we finally figured out how the waterproofing actually worked. And we did that by dismantling sections of the dome and looking at the various layers of waterproofing and fill underneath. These are core samples of the mast and additional ones that were taken to really get an understanding of the metal, and what was going on with the metal, and was it corroding or was it not corroding. Everybody's super interested in the rigging and how it was done originally and what remnants are there of the original rigging. Could any of it be salvaged? Does it all need to be redone? It all needs to be redone. We were interested in how to do conservation work on all the architectural metal, most of which is bronze. There's a door. This shows a piece of a gate that was later installed, I think, so they could keep the solid door open and try to get some ventilation inside the memorial. But this is a conservator trying to do a test in December, and it's really not going too well for that. But we had to reject the tests. This has the original, has half of the ship's bell on it, on the door. This is a test that shows, this is a cleaning test, this is the bell. It has some discoloration here because there's water that drips through the door frame right onto the bell and causes this discoloration. We were testing different ways of doing cleaning. This is one of the embrasure grills that's been removed, and this is before they did anything with it. I think I have some photos that show. Afterwards, this is a clean section here that has been repatinated. This is a clean section that has not been repatinated. And this is a section where they haven't really completed all the cleaning yet. And this is after this particular embrasure has been reinstalled in the memorial, because these really can't be cleaned in situ. They have to be taken out. And I think the treatment's going to be, they're going to soak for a period of time in a solution which helps loosen all the incrustation on it. And we had a study done by Winterthur Museum to help us figure out what was the original patination on this. And because the specs said patination is to be determined in the field by the architect. It doesn't tell you anything else. And you can't really tell from the original photos because they're all in black and white. We were wondering, was it this, traditional dark color, or did they perhaps do some other chemical patination on it that would have given it a different hue? Because oftentimes sculptors will do that. But in this case, no. We discovered that what they probably did was, with the bronze, they did a heat treatment to it which turns the bronze dark. And then they waxed it and just used it as a dark bronze coloration. Oh, we're getting towards the end here. This is March of this year. We're to the preferred alternative selection. There were some decisions that had to be made. One of them was exactly how far were we going to go with the roof and the drainage. Everyone wants to make sure that the drainage is going to work properly in the future and not have any problems. We know that the roof is going to be completely removed in order to install new waterproofing on the dome and hopefully get this thing to stop leaking. The roof was originally attached using a series of cramps. I'm saying the roof, but I mean these individual stone pavers here. And they are moving, most of them are moving down the dome. But in a few areas where they're anchored at the top and the bottom by the shrouds, they really haven't moved all that much. So that's sort of our key point, and we can reference everything else back to those. But we're adding additional cramps to this stone system to help really make sure that these things don't start to migrate down in the future. Plus, we're using a more stable base material underneath for a fill. We did paint removal tests on the mast. It's of course coated with white lead and red lead and who knows what else over the intervening years. I forget how many layers of paint there were on this thing, but we tested 6 or 7 different types of paint removal methodologies, and including laser cleaning and various types of chemical strippers like peel away, and also some aggregate devices. There were some very odd techniques tried out on this. The thing that's going to work the best is a chemical stripper to remove the bulk of the paint, and then laser stripping after that to get it back to bare metal. Because we need to get it back to bare metal before we can do a conservation treatment to sort of stop the corrosion before we apply the new finish layers that will be the final coating on the mast. And it's a high-tech system. It's not a regular paint system. There's also a little bit of structural reinforcement that needs to be done to the mast, just where the seams have really split open and the rivets are all very deteriorated. One idea was to actually, and it was a naval person who thought of this, one of the riggers. He's like, so when are you going to pull the mast? And we're like, pull the mast? He's like, yeah, on a ship you would just pull the mast and put a new one in. And we're like, well, it doesn't really work like that on this one, Portland. We don't think we can pull the mast. But structural engineers are, yes, we could pull the mast. The dome will stand without the mast. So the cemetery had to really think, do we want to go that far with it or not? And they thankfully said, no, we don't want to go that far. We want to keep the mast in situ during the project. So that was something that actually was thought about and had to be decided upon. Because it would have done a lot of other sort of like collateral damage. But so corrosion mitigation evaluation, there were lots of things that were looked at. One of the things that we finally determined was that you could force air through the mast using a pressurization system, and we tested to make sure that would work. And actually, that's what you can see. See the smoke right here coming out through this panel? That was a smoke test. I was wondering why that was there. That was a smoke test to prove that air could actually get through the mast from outside and come out through the bottom. We needed to make sure that there was enough porosity in the cement that it wasn't tight up against the mast, because you couldn't really see it from the top down. And lo and behold, it works. So that's what the engineers came up with, and that's what we're going to install during the project. This is all different kind of testing that was done on various bronze features. This is the outer gate, which is being tested. We tried out these 3 different methodologies for cleaning and repatinating. Same thing with the bell. Support bell has been divided up into little patterns here, and you can see the results here. And this is the main door, which had some really interesting things done to it in the past. We think it was painted at one point in time. We did some XRF, X-ray, fluorescence analysis testing on the door. Winchester came down and brought all their very expensive field gear with them to take readings off of all the metal to determine A, what is the base metal, B, is the corrosion natural or man-made, and then C, what are the components when they got back to the lab of the patina to determine sort of what was used to create the patina. And that's how they figured out that it was a natural, it was pretty much a natural patina except for the way it was created at the beginning using a heat process. Because that creates a certain chemical called tenorite on the surface of the metal, which that's the only way that that can, according to them, it's the only way it can be. So we have to trust them. We did cleaning tests on the marble, cleaning tests on the floor. We pretty much know which system we're going to use. There were a lot of if-then scenarios. If you really want the concrete to dry up, then maybe you have to take the mast out, or A, B, C, D, E. That the Army sat through very patiently with the National Park Service and all the consultants, and finally came up with what we think is going to be the final treatment, which as of today, we think the 100% final construction documents are finished, but we're not 100% sure because we haven't seen them yet. There's still one more time back and forth between the Park Service and the consultants. But in the meantime, there's an interpretive sign there basically explaining to the public sort of what the cemetery is going to try to do. We're hoping this is going to be a less than 1 year construction period. It all depends on how the contracting process goes, who the contractor to execute this project is going to be, how fast they can get their act together, and what the weather is like this winter. Because actually, this is supposedly going to start in the spring, right? If all goes well. March. It's supposed to be done before Veterans Day next year. So we'll see how it goes. I believe that's it. Yes. So any questions on this one?
I know, Becky, I think you said there's several memorials. And so how do you decide which gets attention? Because
the condition assessment that the National Park Service did for the cemetery on the first tier of memorials. So when the National Register process was done, it listed a lot of the structures in the cemetery, and I think they sort of categorized them, didn't they?
They missed a lot.
They did miss a lot.
So that's why I'm trying to do this comprehensive list with the condition assessment.
Right.
So it kind of pairs the condition with how important is getting, work done. Sometimes deterioration is there, but it's not a life safety factor or a harm. So you balance the two, and that's how you decide.
I'm curious because, people know about certain aspects of our history. This is probably one that people know less about. So do you factor in what is the public really interested in, or are you using this as an opportunity? Let's remind you about this event.
It's the reminding part. What I've found in working with memorials all over the country is when the event is fresh in people's mind, I mean, of course, they know and they take care of it. But as time goes on, people forget. And certainly, from the photographs and the writings that the explosion of the mast of the Maine then led to war, right, was a big deal. It's a huge deal, and now people forget. They really don't know.
Well, the last interment was in 1917, after the dedication of the ceremony. They finally brought some of the sailors back from Cuba and reinterred them in the United States. Plus also the remains they found on the ship when they salvaged it were also interred. I think they went in 1950, and in 1917 was the last wave. So it's been almost 100 years since, but you still have people coming up and they have relatives whose names are on the, it's like an early version of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. All the names are carved on the exterior of it, and they're all buried in rings around the USS Maine Memorial. It's a section of sailors that perished in the explosion. So it does get a lot of foot traffic. I'm answering questions there all the time when we're on site.
But for all of these memorials, it is a great opportunity to learn, which is why I'm really happy with that Explorer application and information that we have there, like walking tours of history, because you could do a World War II history tour, a Spanish American, Spanish American. So learning about these is a great opportunity then to bring that information forward to people and interpret the cemetery and all the history. I mean, every day there's like, who's here and why is that there? And you really start to learn, and it's so rich. So it's really an opportunity, even though people have forgotten, you can remind them, or let them know for the first time what happened. Yeah.
Back to your question though, I mean, most people that had had any sort of history with the cemetery in terms of the employees, and there were a few that had been there for a long time, they could tell you the top 5 priorities because they just know. And everybody knows that, you know, this thing leaked horribly. You couldn't really ever go in it. They had to paint it every other year, which was a lot of money for them. They couldn't really figure out why the paint was always failing off of it. It was because it was steel was soaking wet. But there wasn't really a huge safety thing here to visitors. Whereas there was one that they found in the cemetery, the Randolph cannon, which was a safety hazard for visitors because here you have a Civil War tube on an original #2 cast iron field carriage. Field carriage was about ready to collapse. And if that cannon had fallen on someone, that would be it. So we have a short video. I don't know if anybody wants to see it.
Let's just take questions.
Okay. To replace the cannon carriage, and Park Service contracted for the only company in the United States that still makes #2 cast iron Napoleon style field carriages for cannon tubes, and had it delivered a couple of weeks ago and installed in the original location, and then reinstalled the original tube on the new. That was a safety project.
Priority.
So let's just take general questions for either Becky or Tim.
If there are any.
If there's any, we can be finished.
How do you find the Army's attitude towards this sort of work, or do you see changes happening?
Oh, you should be in these meetings with the colonels. Luckily, 2 of the colonels are PEs, so they and one of them actually has some field experience. He worked down in the Norfolk area around Fort Monroe, so we actually had some experience with historic preservation. We are so happy he's there because he was there at the start of this project, and then he got reassigned for 2 years, and he finally came back, not as a colonel, but as a civilian employee. And it's really because of him that the other colonels will just not get up and leave in the middle of a meeting. Like, why are we spending 20 minutes talking about, you know, the corrosion of the steel? Is it going to fall or is it not going to fall? No, sir, it's not going to fall. How long is it going to last? Oh, maybe 200 years. Oh, then why am I worrying about it while I'm here for 2 years? Let me go to the next meeting.
But
I kind of have to get their attention.
There's the Army, and then there's Arlington National Cemetery, which is this odd character. It's not really an Army installation, but they want to put all the Army rules on it, and they rotate Army people in and out, but there's still civilian leadership too. So it's a real fine line to kind of walk
right. When a colonel
and get
comes,
something done.
Right. When a colonel comes back as a civilian employee, they tend to pay more attention to what he says than any of the non-military civilian staff, especially people like me who work for the Park Service.
But they want it bright, they want it white, they want it clean. Yes, sir. But
It's been a learning experience
But
dealing with
it's a
them.
great opportunity to educate again. Anyone who's in preservation knows you never stop really talking to people, educating people about why preservation is important, about why you're doing what you're doing. And so it just is kind of like I get to go to square one again and start. I'm building that part of the organization from zero. So I feel like I've made great strides, but I know there's more that I can do in a lifetime. And the Army puts a certain, perspective on it. And our biggest, the group that helps us the most, of course, with contracting is the Army Corps of Engineers. And they're dams, they're big stuff. They want big projects. So this year, to give an example, there was on the books a project to repair the boundary wall. The boundary walls at Arlington, some of them date from the beginning. And they're well-made, they're handcrafted stone walls. Seneca red sandstone and another kind of gray, no one's identified it yet, stone. And they're holding up pretty good for their age. A few places have collapsed to rebuild them. They had the money to rebuild over 1.25 miles of wall. And the Army Corps designed this huge foundation, 5 foot wide, a core concrete wall with rebar, and then they were going to cut the stones and just kind of glue them on to the concrete because we want this wall to last. And they had no idea that those stones were going to pop off. They're horrible. You see those walls everywhere. So here's an example where instead of like just saying no, 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 I said, okay, that's not going to work. I'll work with them and start to educate them about traditional building of stone walls and what that means. And in the end, I ended up getting the project, still 1.25 miles, but it was a small foundation, concrete, traditional built wall, just the way it would have been, with the capstone. They were to they had the document before every section of wall, there's piers, so you know each section. Photograph it so that we could duplicate the style, because enough masons worked on it. There was different styles in different areas. And so I ended up with a traditional wall. And I was really, really pleased. But then I got elated. 2 weeks ago, the colonel called me in and said, they were talking about the wall. It was lead. I helped pick the contractor. But they had an award again. And the colonel said, if you were queen for day, what would you do with this wall? And it was my one chance to tell him I wouldn't do this project. We have not done our due diligence. This wall is in good shape. We do not need to rebuild it. I would repoint, reset the capstones. And I was just amazed. He decided not to let the wall contract. So we saved 1.25 miles of original stone wall. But every project has a different take you have to do. You have to know the players and how you can approach them to get the best preservation project you can eat out of them.
So Becky, obviously this is the kind of place it's been a long time since I was a small child, that you could really spend the day walking around.
Oh, easily.
Is there places that you can get food there? Can you bring in food and sit someplace?
The only thing that they sell in the gift shop is water. Officially, you are not allowed to eat in the cemetery, although they are now relaxing that in Section 60, which is the newest area where soldiers from Afghanistan are buried and the more recent conflicts, because families come there on Memorial Day and they sit there and it's like neighbors. They're talking to one another and they have picnic lunches. So you can, if you're discreet, come in there and have food and drink, but they don't sell anything. Yeah.
And there's no picnic tables. Nothing for the comfort of visitors. It's all
Oh,
about
very little.
being something.
We're thinking about putting in some shade shelters at the bus stops. So they're softening a little. Yes.
Does Arlington have a friends group? Like, there's sort of the White House has those friends.
That's on my to-do list
Is
because
it, okay, so it doesn't
those-
exist yet?
those private headstones I showed, those really fancy ones, if a headstone is not government issue, we can't work on it
Oh, okay, interesting.
unless it's a safety issue.
Okay.
And that's why that cannon the town was talking about, everyone thought that that was a private headstone. And we weren't to work on it. I was not spending money on it, even though it was, finally it was safety, kicked it over into we'll work on it. And in doing that, we did the research and found out that that one cannon is the only one in all the cemetery that's government issued. And it's because that general was the head of artillery during the Civil War. And he went on to be a very, his career went on in the Army. And so he was a well-loved general, and when he died, we had the orders, place this cannon on his grave. And so it deteriorated because everyone thought it was private. So we need to research all of these and really find out. It may not be the only private one or public one that's fancy, but it's the only one we know about.
So will the cemetery put pressure on a private group to maintain something?
They try to, but of course, a family tree, goes out and out. So someone that was buried there in 1910, there's probably nobody who directly related that wants to spend money. And there's actually a committee right now, and one of the tasks we're gonna research these and find out what the whole scope of the problem is. And if needed, we'll go to Congress and ask for authority to maintain. Or we'll do a friends group, because that's another thing on the ticket. You could establish a friends group that would work with us to conserve the private things within the cemetery.
Yeah, I was just curious, because I know that's been a strategy, it's been like Laurel Hill and some of the other famous cemeteries around the nation.
Yeah, and I think, given that it's Arlington, I think it would be, could get funds pretty
Yeah.
easily from private individuals. But it's pretty, even groups that put up monuments, as soon as the monuments are, the group dissolves.
Right.
And who you go to. So, yeah, it's a problem.
Well, thank you both very much.
Thank
I'm
you,
sure you're
everybody.
available for questions that people have.
I'm sure that more than they want to know.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time, everyone.
Thank you.
Great.
Sticking with
Saturday
it.
afternoon.
For Saturday, but it is cold.
So we're going to keep some of these.
I was actually just gonna leave it.
Okay.
You can have a whole stack, I mean, the cemetery's got millions.
They got millions of them. At least 3.5.
So this is my-
Exactly.